Now, before setting your calories, we need to establish basal metabolic rate. So this is your BMR. This is the amount of calories that your body needs just to exist. So even if you're lying down all day, you are sick, you're not doing anything, you're literally not moving. This is the amount that it costs in terms of calories, so units of energy that it's going to cost for you to just be alive. And the two biggest things influencing BMR, fat-free mass, so muscle mass, and your fat mass, so stored body fat. And the more muscle that you have, generally the higher BMR, because muscle tissue burns more calories than fat. So think about it this way. If you have someone who's 120 pounds and you take someone who has a high degree of muscle mass versus someone who has less muscle mass, but they're the same weight, the person that has more muscle mass, it is going to cause them to burn more calories just existing. And this is one of the reasons that I think a lot of people, they get hung up on specific numbers and they're like, well, I can't really lose weight unless I go under this threshold, or after this threshold, I tend to gain weight. One of the best ways to kind of hack the system is if you have more muscle, you're going to be able to get away with eating more because it's going to be more costly just for you to exist. So something that I like to do, and this is just generally to give you a ballpark of where you might sit in terms of your BMR. I like to take someone's weight and multiply it either by 10, 12, or 15. Now, realistically, for most women, I stick more to the 10 to 12 range. And the less muscle you have, I'm going to err on the side of that lower multiplier. So in some cases, even looking at 8 or 9. Now, if you're 120 pounds and you use this range to essentially determine, okay, here's roughly what my BMR is. I mean, you're looking at 1,200 to a little under 1,500 calories as your BMR. So the amount of calories you're burning every day. But remember, this is just an estimate. And body composition, yes, it generally influences your caloric burn, but past getting, a good sense of where you fall, we really have to look at what happens when you eat a certain amount of calories, and does this result in weight loss, in weight maintenance, or weight gain? Now, as a rule, if you're heavier, you're going to need more calories just to survive. And this means that your BMR is going to rise naturally as your body weight goes up, which means we can accept the fact that as body weight goes down, so in the case that you're losing 20, 30 pounds, there's going to be some drop off in the amount of calories that you burn specific to your basal metabolic rate. Now, next, we have to consider your daily activity. So outside of formal workouts, and this is something that is typically referred to as NEAT, so non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Now, some people, I know a girl is like super active, very fidgety, like even throughout her workouts in between sets, she's always dancing and like jumping around and just moving a ton. Now, you also have the other end of the spectrum where like you don't move that much and you aren't very fidgety. And this is something that we have to respect, that like NEAT is going to vary dramatically between individuals and is frequently underestimated. So as much as we might want to like establish, be like, well, I'm a super fidgety person, so I therefore should eat more food, it still is going to come back down to, once we put you at a certain intake, what happens once you follow that intake? Do you lose, do you gain, or do you maintain? Because remember, by definition, if you're in a deficit, you will lose weight. And if you're in a surplus, you will gain weight. Now, whenever working with a client for the first time, personally, I like to underestimate, because realistically, if we overestimate, well, then we've just wasted those first few weeks of a fat loss phase. And remember, I've talked about this before. Dietary fatigue is going to accrue whether or not you lose weight, whether or not you lose 0.5 pound or 1.5 pounds. If you are not seeing progress on the scale, and if you're not seeing it in body compositional changes, it's going to be harder to establish buy-in to the program, which is realistically why I'd rather have someone start a little bit lower, even if that means within the first few weeks of dieting, we see really quick progress. Maybe progress is a little too quick. From there, we can then increase food. So another aspect that I want you to think about is step count. So this is not the traditional sense like, okay, just fidgeting, but it is non-stimulating exercise. It's not exercise or cardio in the structured sense. It's not intentional steps that you're taking throughout the day. It's just steps that you naturally incur. And I know this gets a little muddy because some people are like, well, I walk my dog. And like, if I didn't have a dog, I would still take these walks every single day. Like, when does this become structured or intentional versus unintentional? Really, it just comes down to, on average, how much are you moving outside of your workouts and outside of structured machine cardio? I've worked with clients who truly, like, without trying, without being intentional, they get in 15 to 20,000 steps a day. And for them, we have to be really cognizant that we're considering this when establishing their deficit. And realistically, this could be compounded as a form of non-exercise activity. And as a coach, it's really important to know the intentionality behind someone's non-exercise activity and whether or not that's something that's likely going to persist even as they enter into a deficit. Now, on the other hand, I've had clients who aren't necessarily busy and are very sedentary. Maybe they work remotely and also are in school, so they spend a lot of time studying or reading. And because of that, their step count, maybe they don't have pets or don't have kids, their step count is very low. And it's something that can be very eye-opening if you've never tracked. And it's not something that I necessarily think like you have to have an Apple Watch or you have to have a Whoop or a Wise Watch, but you can, if you have an iPhone, you can just look at your phone and see like, okay, how much activity am I getting per day? And this is something that I think for a lot of people, unintentionally, they're probably going to get somewhere between 4,000 to 6,000 steps. But in the case that someone is much lower than this, if someone's struggling to get in 3,000 or 4,000 steps a day, if that's something they have to be intentional about, this needs to be factored into determining their starting calories when going into a fat loss phase. And by proxy, we can also modulate step count if they have the schedule that allows for them to get in more steps a day, and if it's not a hassle for them based on their other responsibilities. If, let's say, someone isn't able to get in a lot of structured cardio, but they do have the ability to go on walks before and after every meal or first thing in the morning. Maybe they do have an animal and they're like, yeah, you know what? I can add an extra 5 minutes to these walks that I'm already going to be taking. Now, the next thing that we have to consider is workout intensity. So let's consider structure exercise training, so weightlifting. How hard does someone actually train? I've spoken with a lot of people. We'll get on these like 15-minute consultation calls to give them more information about my coaching service. And throughout this, one of the questions I do ask is, what's your training like? How hard do you train? Like, how comfortable are you with gauging intensity? And sure, this is something that subjectively someone might be able to depict pretty accurately, but footage is something that I personally find really helpful as a coach. So I have all my clients send me roughly 3 to 5 training videos a week so that I can observe, yes, intensity, technical execution, of course, safety, but largely I'm wanting to get an idea of whether or not they're training as intensely as I need them to, or whether they're a little bit shy of this. Now, something that I've talked about before in a different solo episode is training terminology and more specifically intensity and what this actually looks like. So if you haven't checked out that episode, I definitely recommend it. But when we're looking at intensity, this is going to be defined as proximity to failure. And this not only is important in gauging where someone should start a fat loss phase from, but it's also important in understanding what is the likelihood that they're still going to be burning calories through the recovery process in between sessions. Realistically, someone who's training very hard, like consistently close to failure, they're going to burn more calories and they're going to recover differently from someone who's not training nearly as intensely or as consistently. And this across the board will absolutely influence calorie targets and the kind of deficit that we need to create through other means. Now, for a lot of people, what we have to assume, or what we should assume, is that you're not going to burn that much in your training sessions. So, I mean, realistically, if you're in the gym, maybe an hour, 2 hours, I mean, this isn't going to make up a bulk of your deficit. And frankly, I don't want someone in the gym weightlifting 6 to 7 times a week, because that's not going to allow them to reach that proximity to failure that I'm after.